I first met him when we had him to Fenway Park for the Red Sox annual birthday tribute to Jackie Robinson. And I was so impressed. And he came to San Diego, thanks to the Padres. We did a great event at the Hall of Champions in Balboa Park, as we are today. He was on the air with Mr. Enberg, as I believe he may be tonight. He teaches at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. In my view, he's become America's leading scholar on Jackie Robinson, the man I consider to be the most important African American in the history of the United States. This is a very special person. Welcome, please, Dr. Michael Long.
It's great to see all of you, especially the good crop of students. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. Can you all hear me in the back? If you can, feel free to wave your hands as I go along. But thanks to Jessica for that great introduction. Jessica, you're really articulate. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. Are you there? Way to go, Jess. Thank you. And thanks to George for that kind introduction as well. I like to refer to George as Mr. Civil Society. He's long dedicated his life to transforming America into the land of freedom and equal opportunity, into that beloved community that Martin Luther King dreamed of, and that Jackie Robinson sacrificed so much for. So will you join me in thanking George for his great work along the way? Thanks, George. I have prepared comments to make, and then I'll take Q&A afterwards. So let's go to it. Let's go to 1968. Here's what the Hall of Famer Jackie Robinson had to say about himself. I think I've become much more aggressive since I left baseball. Now that is an absolutely stunning claim. After all, it comes from a man who, while he was shattering racial barriers in Major League Baseball, also stole home plate 19 times, including, oh, there it is, oops, in the 1955 World Series. You can see this on YouTube. It was a very controversial call. It was a close call. The catcher at the time is, does anybody know? It's from the Yanks, Yogi Berra. That's not the picture. No, but it's sort of like that. Thanks to our baseball historians here. I knew I'd get nailed. I was testing all of you. But he was very aggressive. So to hear him say that in 1968 is absolutely dramatic to me, and I want to talk about that eventually. But you can watch the steal of that 1955 game on YouTube. It has 250,000 hits. You can also see Jackie Robinson reciting the alphabet on Sesame Street. He loved kids, but you can see that on YouTube as well. I had the occasion, by the way, to talk with Rachel Robinson about that famous steal in 1955. I asked her whether Robinson had ever expressed any doubts about being safe, and she just laughed. And then she told me that every time she sees Yogi Berra now, Yogi is the catcher at the time, they don't say hi to each other at all. Yogi just says, out. And Rachel says, safe. Rachel is an incredibly talented woman, and I hope you all will know that. Jackie described her as a full partner in all of his life endeavors. And here's a lovely picture of them with Jackie Jr. For some reason, Jonathan, that's jumping ahead. With Jackie Jr. When he was just a little baby. But I love that picture. And here's one of my favorite things that Jackie wrote about Rachel. Let me take a second and read it for you. If you have the book, it's on page 54. I'm in the second paragraph down. I recall the days at ballparks all over America when I got a hard way to go. I can remember being insulted by someone because of my race, or just having a bad day or a slump. Ray was always there when I got home. She was there to say exactly the right word or to kiss me and make me realize that after all, the world hadn't come to an end. In my trophy room at home, I've got lots of awards and medallions and certificates, and sometimes I think there should be 2 names on them instead of just mine. For Ray has been a full partner in anything I have done or tried to do ever since that lucky day in California when we decided to share our lives. If you see 42, you'll see that their life together was really a love story. And Rachel certainly praises that point even to this day. She's 90 years old now. There's a picture of her when she was at the White House just a couple weeks ago. She's 90 years old now, still full of energy. And the last time I saw her was when the new movie 42 was just in production, and we were talking about the casting, and they had just selected the woman to play her, and she said, "Mike, she is absolutely gorgeous." And then Rachel added this, "Now let's hope she can act." Tell you, Rachel is a woman of steely nerves. She's tough as nails, and if you know about her life, then you know why she's tough as nails even to this day. But the word from Sharon Robinson is that the family really loves the movie. So I hope you will join me in going to see it. There it is, 42. Oh. So go see that. It starts today. What I want to do, though, today, if I may, is be bold enough to point us beyond 42, beyond 1947. And if there's anything I want you to leave with today, it's the sense that Jackie Robinson was more than a baseball player. He was more than the first African-American to play Major League Baseball in the 20th century. And he was more than a Hall of Famer. Most Americans, I believe, especially white Americans like me, have not fully understood the whole Jackie Robinson. And the reason is that we have frozen him in 1947. That's the year he shattered the color barrier in Major League Baseball. And with good reason, we freeze him there. It was a heroic year. Robinson was courageous. He was sacrificial. He turned the other cheek, as some of you know, in the face of vicious and racist taunts and jeers. Turn the other cheek was the advice he got from, where did he get that advice from? And where did Branch Rickey get that advice? Yeah, Jesus. But those were really tough days for Robinson in 1947, 48, and 49 when he was turning the other cheek, especially because it wasn't in his character. And he would often say that, "I'm not naturally nonviolent. My inclination is to strike back, to hit these guys." But sure enough, he didn't hit back. He turned the other cheek. And this is the Jackie Robinson that most of America knows and loves and remembers. It's the young man who nonviolently soldiers his way through racism. Why do we love this Jackie Robinson? May I suggest that we love him partly because not only the story is so inspirational and so heroic, but also because it's so non-threatening to us. He doesn't threaten us that much when he's nonviolent. He doesn't hit back. He doesn't hit us back. Or maybe because, as the New York Times writer Dana Jennings put it this last Sunday, this Jackie Robinson makes us feel good about ourselves, about baseball, about our perceived progress on race relations. So it'll be my task this afternoon for just a little bit to tell you a little more of the story. The story of Jackie Robinson beyond home plate is at least in part the story of an uneasy patriot who wakes up at the end of his life and realizes that he no longer loves America in the way he once did. And those are tough words, and it's a tough story to tell, but let me tell you some of it. Go back with me, if you would, to 1953. President Eisenhower's in office. He gave a speech at the Anti-Defamation League. It was nationally televised, really big deal. Back in the day when they televised speeches like this. At the end of the speech, he makes a beeline for Robinson in the audience. He shakes his hand, and Jackie is smitten. He goes home, he writes a letter to the president, and here's what it says in part. "My wife and I will always remember our experience that night. It is events like this that make us certain our faith in democracy is indeed justified." And Eisenhower replied, "In answer May I say only that you represent to me and to many Americans one more evidence that our democracy is indeed in our country a workable living ideal. That's a great exchange. I love it. I included it in an earlier book I did. But what I want to do now is jump ahead to July 4th, 1969. The New York Times is doing an article on the American flag, and they decided to interview Jackie Robinson. And so here's what Robinson has to say. Here's what the Army veteran and America's icon had to say in 1969. I wouldn't fly the flag on the 4th of July or any other day. When I see a car with a flag pasted on it, I figure the guy behind the wheel is not my friend. More tough words from America's icon. Robinson believed at this point that the flag had become captive to the conservative movement, with its emphasis on law and order, its opposition to demands from the civil rights movement, and its support for the Vietnam War, and he was not happy about that. Now, he wasn't a vocal opponent of the war. His son, Jackie Jr., earned a Purple Heart there. But Robinson had little tolerance for anyone who equated patriotism with uncritical support for the politics of the new president. In 1969, who's the new president? Richard Nixon. Now, interestingly, Robinson had found Nixon to be racially progressive in the late 1950s, and he even campaigned full-time for Richard Nixon in the 1960 campaign against Kennedy. George, who used to work for the Kennedys? But in 1968, Robinson is labeling Richard Nixon a racist. He was angry that Nixon had openly courted Southern segregationists during the presidential campaign. And get this. Remember, Nixon is in office, and what does he often do when he's in office? He calls in J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. And so shortly after Robinson's tirade against the flag, John Ehrlichman, who is one of Nixon's hatchet men, right? He calls the FBI and asks for a written report on Robinson. Can you believe it? A written FBI report on Jackie Robinson? They didn't understand Jackie Robinson either. And what I also want you to know is that while Robinson was a fierce critic of Nixon, of Kennedy, of Eisenhower, he loved America. And I will tell you this, he was so different from the man on the left. And who is that? Malcolm X. In 1963, Robinson and Malcolm wrote scorching letters to each other. And here's what Robinson had to say to Malcolm. Personally, Malcolm, I reject your dream of a separate state. Too many of our young people have gone to jail. Too many millions of dollars have been invested in our fight for equality for us to pay any heed to your advice. Whether you like this country or not is of little concern to me. America, yes, it's not perfect by a long shot, but I happen to like it here, and I will do all I can to help make it the kind of place where my children and theirs can live in dignity. Now, those are strong words, especially when you think that he's saying them to Malcolm, who's no weak man. And Robinson was not exaggerating. After integrating baseball, he became a full-fledged leader in the civil rights movement. He lobbied politicians all the time, presidents. Here's a letter he wrote to President Kennedy. He worked for Chock full of Nuts as a vice president of personnel, and he would use Chock stationery to write all these great letters. But he would send letter after letter after letter to politicians asking them to advance civil rights. Listen to this letter he wrote to Barry Goldwater in 1964. Let me give you a little bit of background. For those of you who may not know Goldwater, he was running for president. He was a conservative Republican, and Robinson called him a bigot and a menace to our country. And Goldwater knew that Robinson was an opinion maker, so he asked for a private meeting with Robinson. And Robinson fired off this reply. You got to listen to this. Relating to your proposal that we discuss civil rights, what could you possibly have to say? Are you going to tell me why you have consistently attacked the constitutionality of the United States Supreme Court edict on schools? He's referring to Brown versus Board of Education, 1953. why you have constantly taken the position that decency and human rights should be left to the states. Are you going to tell me why you have allowed yourself to become a political bedfellow with some of the slimiest elements in the nation, such as the Ku Klux Klan and the John Birch Society? Now, what are you going to say about extremism now, Senator Goldwater? You called for it. He said extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. You called for it, and the answer came back in the thudding feet and the crashing store windows and the Molotov cocktails and the crack of police bullets and the clubbing of heads and the hate and the violence and the fear that electrified Harlem and Rochester and New Jersey. He's talking about race riots. Now what are you going to say? Well, Goldwater doesn't say anything. He didn't reply, and they didn't meet. Can you get some sense of Robinson's aggression beyond home plate? Are you with me? All right. So after baseball, Robinson lobbied hard for civil rights. In addition, and let me rattle them off here, he worked tirelessly for the NAACP. I love this photo of him. He took part in a lot of pickets. He played Santa Claus to underprivileged children. Can you imagine Jackie Robinson dressed up as Santa Claus? Let me read you this a little bit. I have to read it to you. He's recounting playing Santa Claus to some underprivileged kids at a hangar in Idlewood. As much as I enjoyed our family Christmas, still I don't know if it was any more of a thrill than the opportunity I had playing Santa Claus this year for the Fresh Air Fund. Now, playing Santa to some 266 boys and girls is not an easy thing to do. It required me talking with and handing out presents to each of these kids, and believe me, it got rather uncomfortable in that hangar at the airport under that long beard, red suit, and all those pillows. Though I've been lucky enough to experience an ovation or two on the baseball diamond, I can honestly say I'd never heard anything like the roar that greeted me that afternoon. There was a momentary fear when one youngster shouted, "Hi, Jackie Robinson, you can't fool me." But the other kids didn't hear, they didn't care. Out at the airport, as each youngster came up to talk to me, Santa, I had a more than uneasy feeling. In somewhat of an unsure manner, one would say, "Santa, may I have a bike or a doll, a train, or some other gift he had long dreamed of?" How do you promise a child a present that may never come? It was a feeling of great sadness, but one also of great happiness as I watched each child go away with hope. And hope, after all, is the greatest gift of all. May I continue my list? Robinson didn't stop there. He joined Martin Luther King Jr. at civil rights rallies in Birmingham and Albany. He and Rachel raised countless dollars for the civil rights movement. They would have afternoon jazz picnics at their house in Stamford, Connecticut, invite big benefactors and jazz greats. And then they'd bring together the civil rights leaders, too, who were always at odds. They had big egos. And Jackie and Rachel brought them together to try to get along. Jackie Robinson also helped to build Black churches that were scorched because of their voter registration efforts. He and Nelson Rockefeller raised $50,000 to build churches that had been bombed and dynamited in the South. He went to the March on Washington with his family, called it the greatest day of his life. And here he is with his son David in 1963 in Washington. He also worked full-time on community issues with the man in the middle there. Who is that? Nelson Rockefeller. Yeah, Nelson Rockefeller was his favorite politician of all time. Jackie also helped to build Freedom National Bank in Harlem, and here he is with Hubert Humphrey giving him a pen from the bank. He did that because blacks in Harlem couldn't get loans at a decent rate. They couldn't get loans, they couldn't get access to accounts, and so Robinson thinks, let's build a bank. He accepted the vice presidency of Jesse Jackson's organization PUSH, People United to Serve Humanity. And he pushed Bowie Kuhn to engineer the hiring of African Americans as managers in Major League Baseball. I stop. Now you know why Jackie Robinson said that he became much more aggressive since leaving baseball. Now, where does that aggression come from? Can you find Jackie in that picture? He's the youngest. Where does the aggression come from? I'm going to tell you where Robinson thought it came from. He's writing about his family. Rachel and I often talk about those first hard days in baseball, and especially about the way baseball has changed our lives and the lives of our own children. My own childhood is one reason I try to win all the time. When I was 1 year old, my mother was left alone on a farm in Georgia with 5 small children. I've never seen my father. My mother took us in dirty Jim Crow coaches to Pasadena, California, and raised us there. We lived in a house on Pepper Street on what money she was able to earn by working as a domestic servant. We never had much to eat except for day-old bread that we dunked in sugar and milk. Even now, Rachel has to remind me to eat green vegetables. I do so, but only as an example to my family. We had meat on Sundays only when my mother was able to get extra work. I was the youngest in the family, and my sister, Willa Mae, who was 2 years older, took care of me, when my mother was working. When she went to school, I went along and played alone in the sandbox in the school until she got out of class. Unbelievable. The school authorities complained to my mother about this, for I was only 3 years old, and they didn't want me on their hands. If I quit working to stay home to take care of him, she said, I'll have to go on relief. It'll be cheaper for the city if you just let him play in the sandbox. So I stayed in the sandbox. When I was old enough to go to school myself, I told my mother she could save food by not fixing a lunch for me. I was the best athlete in class. The other boys brought me sandwiches and dimes for the movies, just so they could play on my team. So you might say that I turned professional at an early age, and that I had to win from the start if I wanted to eat. Rachel Robinson has called her husband, Jackie, an informal civil rights leader, and I think that's an understatement. I think Jackie Robinson, like Martin Luther King Jr., belongs in the Hall of Fame of civil rights. In spite of all of his constructive efforts, though, near the end of his life, he drew closer to Malcolm X's position. And in the preface to his 1972 autobiography, he writes this: I cannot stand and sing the national anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I am a black man in a white world. This is shortly before he died. A variety of events had served to deepen his pessimism, including plans to slash welfare and social welfare programs for poor children. But even then, Robinson mustered enough energy to write to the president. He took to the pen. The issue at this point was school desegregation. Nixon wanted to stop busing. Robinson wrote this: Mr. President, whether we blacks helped to put you in office or not, you still are president of all the people. We want busing so our children can compete. Nixon, like Goldwater, did not reply. And Robinson died of a heart attack 7 months later. Unbelievably, to the end, he was still trying, still hoping, in politics and in baseball. Just 9 days before he died, he went to the 1972 World Series, 9 days before he died, and he threw out the ceremonial pitch. He refused to do that until he could get Bowie Kuhn to say that I'm working on hiring black managers for Major League Baseball. Robinson never saw black managers during his lifetime. But in footage from the game, you can see how old he looks. The game really took a toll on him. All that stress really took a toll on him. He's virtually blind from diabetes, and if you watch this on YouTube, you can see he's feeling for the ball. But however weak he was, he also said this in that last appearance: I'm extremely proud and pleased to be here this afternoon, but must admit, I'm going to be tremendously more pleased and more proud when I look at that third base coaching line and see a black face managing in baseball. To the very end, Jackie Robinson was a Hall of Famer to be sure, but he was a civil rights leader in his own right, and to the day of his death, he fiercely competed against anyone who would dare to stand in his way as he sought to win first-class citizenship for all Americans. Yes, he died, I believe, a black man deeply angered by discrimination. He died a prophet, an angry prophet, willing to rebuke the world's most powerful leaders of his day. But primarily, and this is something that Rachel Robinson taught me when we talked about this book, primarily, Jackie Robinson died a father and a husband. A father and a husband committed to making America a better place. A community where his children and all of you and all of us would be able to live in dignity. Jackie Robinson died trying to make sure that no child died homeless and helpless. I'm not going to read it for you, but there's this great piece he wrote just after he gets elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, where he speaks directly to the children and he says, look, if this happened to me, you can do great things in your life too. His country might have disappointed him, and politicians certainly did. But Jackie Robinson would never give up on the children and youth he came into contact with. Or, anybody he saw, including maybe some old white drunks. But he was especially interested in marginalized African Americans. I won't have it made, Robinson said, until the most underprivileged Negro in Mississippi can live in equal dignity with anyone else in America. Robinson, to the time of his death, never felt, believe it or not, as if he had it made. That, I think, was the real Jackie Robinson. Thank you all very much.
Wow. So those who thought Jackie was just a baseball player, he was that and a lot more. And the case can be made. I'm happy to make it. Jackie Robinson was the greatest athlete in American history. He played football at UCLA. He played basketball at UCLA. He held the NC2A broad jump record, and he played baseball. And those who saw Jackie play those different sports said baseball was his lesser sport. Strandberg's nodding. He was so extraordinary. And in 1970, as a press secretary to Senator Charles Goodell of New York, Jackie was one of the senators, had endorsed him. I had the privilege of meeting him in New York. Very brief, but the moment lives on in my memory. And Dr. Long has done an extraordinary, this presentation's extraordinary, the book's extraordinary. It's the letters that Jackie wrote. And we don't have a lot of copies, but I hope you'll be able to leave with one. And now we'll have just a few moments of dialogue. Who wants to ask Carol Eisman? Yes.
Well, it's not really a question. It's just that I feel very, honored that back in, nobody said anything about age, please. Back in 1949, I got to see Jackie Robinson play. George knows I was originally a Yankee fan, but somebody got us some tickets and said, and I said, I don't want to go see the bums. I think the thing that caught me a little off guard, I was 7 years old at the time, was sitting in a section, predominantly, of course, white people all around me, and hearing some racial slurs that they were saying, out into the crowd. And as a 7-year-old, I just didn't know what to say. It just got me very off guard. But again, I'm looking at that picture and it has to bring some tears to my eyes because, I'm blessed. I actually got to see him play twice.
Let me just say for those young people at La Jolla Country Day, the Dodgers were lovingly known as the Bums. And they had the great Willard Mullen, the sports cartoonist of New York World Telegram and Sun, probably more than anyone else, immortalized because whenever he drew about the Dodgers, he drew a bum in a baseball uniform, but it was done all in love. There was no negative part of it. Mr. Cassidy, did you have your hand up? Derek, stand up. Let's hear stand up so we can hear you, Derek.
What was Jackie's relationship, if any, with Muhammad Ali?
Complicated. Early on, he refused to call him Muhammad Ali. Robinson was a social conservative in many ways. He was very progressive on civil rights issues, but he was a social conservative on other issues. And he refused to call Muhammad Ali, so he kept calling him Cassius Clay in his columns, long after the name change. He was disappointed with what he called Cassius Clay's refusal to fight for America. He believed that all citizens, young men of Cassius Clay's age, had an obligation to fight. At the same time, he respected Muhammad Ali's principled politics. And so it was really interesting. You can see some of it in the book. It's really a nicely nuanced position. Robinson felt that everybody should serve his country in military service. He also believed that Ali was doing a good thing by standing up for his religious principles at the time. He also refused to knock Ali for following Malcolm X. And a lot of people were doing that at the time as well. And I think I'll stop there. But it was a complicated relationship. You bet.
Yes, sir. The gentleman from New York.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to reading the book now.
By the way, you can tell that I'm a product of Congress when I say the gentleman from New York.
Right. The gentleman, you're very listening. What I find most fascinating about your presentation, and I'm looking forward to see if it carries through the book, is that in an America that is increasingly polarized, and where if you believe one thing, you must believe everything that fill in the blank, church, party, neighborhood, community speaks, or if you believe this thing, you must believe everything. You've actually managed to draw a very nuanced, very articulate picture of a complicated person, of a person who loved his country but found flaws in it, of a person who seems to have thought that there were things that were good about being an African American in a racist country, and yet hope that that would change. And I applaud you for that, because I actually think what is happening in America is a polarization that Jackie Robinson couldn't exist today in America, because he'd have to pick sides. And I personally am so damn tired of picking sides. Because there's some things I believe from one side and other things I believe from the other. And I'm so glad I came today. I'm glad for my friend Ashley Phillips for having invited me. And so I applaud you for it.
Oh, thanks. Robin? Just politically, Robinson was really complicated. His favorite politician was Nelson Rockefeller. He also campaigned for Hubert Humphrey. He campaigned for Richard Nixon. He campaigned for, Charles Rangel. Yeah, Charles Rangel.
And Charles Goodell.
Is that okay? Yeah, he was just really complicated politically. He described himself as an independent for the most part. And he believed in something called the two-party system. And the two-party system, as Robinson envisioned it, was to make sure that African Americans weren't in the back pocket of any one political party. I mean, he resented the fact that the Democrats had a lot of African Americans in the back pocket, as he put it. He really didn't like that because he thought that took away political power for African Americans. So what he wanted them to do was sort of to suspend themselves and then determine which candidate, which party to go with, according to the principles that civil rights agenda demanded. Beautiful, but it didn't happen. After after Kennedy wins in 1960, Robinson grows very frustrated, and he writes to Republican National Chair Albert Herman this: "We really need to work on the two-party system." And Herman writes back, "I think you'll be a messiah for the Republican Party if they listen to you." Robinson really wanted the Republican Party to pay attention to African American voters. He was disgusted with Nixon's campaign because they didn't go to Harlem. They didn't go to the African American areas at all. And because King didn't call Martin Luther King Jr., who was in jail at the time, and Robinson thought that he should have. And there's a long backstory there. But nothing could disgust him more, I think, than to seeing the Republicans ignore the African American vote, and to seeing African Americans go to one party in particular.
And in fact, for a very long time in our history, Negroes were Republicans, and they were Republicans because of Abraham Lincoln. And so there was an extraordinary change that took place because the party didn't address their needs. Someone, yes, sir. Oh, Mr. Yes, David Gleason.
Thank you. What do you think Jackie Robinson would think about race relations today, 40-some years after his death?
Well, I think that Robinson would be especially disturbed by the poverty that the African American population has experienced in this Great Recession. Young African Americans are unemployed, 1/3 of them unemployed. Poverty hit them at a rate 1.5 to 2 times harder than it hit whites in this recession. And Robinson was dedicated to advancing civil rights through economic justice. And that's why he founded the Freedom National Bank in Harlem. And I think that point, above all other points, is something that he would really focus on. He was very concerned about employment for African Americans, about jobs. He loved Rockefeller in part because Rockefeller was a liberal Republican, liberal on race issues, but he was really interested in economic opportunity for African Americans. And so Robinson really rallied around that. And I think he would be terribly disappointed to see the poverty that's still hitting the African Americans. What else would he say about race relations? I think that somebody asked Rachel Robinson when she was at the White House what she felt. Similar question was put to her, and her simple response was, we've really come a long way. I was there in 1947. I saw what happened to Jackie. I saw what happened to me. We've come a long way from that, but we've got a long way to go. And that simple response, I think, speaks volumes. And I think her husband would be right there with her.
Dr. Gersh, Mr. Enberg, and Dr. Clatton.
What are his children doing, and what's your relationship to the movement?
His daughter, Sharon, works for Major League Baseball in education development. And she also writes books about her father. There's a new one that came out by Scholastic, so check that out. She writes some great books. His son, David, works on he runs a coffee co-op in Africa. Tanzania. His father, Jackie, worked for Chock full of Nuts after baseball. It's a coffee company, so I think he's following in his father's footsteps. And he's trying to lift up the folks in Tanzania economically. And Jackie Jr. died in a car accident during Jackie's life. Jackie Jr. earned a Purple Heart in Vietnam. He came back addicted to drugs. And he had begun to turn his life around when there was an awful car accident, and it just crushed the family. And you can see some awful pictures of Rachel and Jackie just hugging each other at that time. I mean, it takes my breath away even to think about them just standing here. My relationship to the movie is none. I didn't act as a consultant for the movie. I talked with Rachel about it, but that's about it.
It's obviously a passionate piece of work for you, long research, and we felt that in your presentation. But you never uncover all the information that you would like. If Jackie Robinson walked in this room right now and you had a chance to ask him one question that would maybe connect another dot, what would it be?
Why did you go to the Black Committee to re-elect the President fundraiser for Richard Nixon in 1972? After all that, after he dissed you so many times, after the Republican Party ignored you so many times, why did you go back? The guy is amazing in the sense that he just didn't give up on people. You know, he believed in redemption. He really did. And he worked to redeem people. We're quick to write off people, to send them to the gallows. Robinson, that wasn't his style. He could say some very sharply prophetic words about people, and did. Tom Yawkey of the Boston Red Sox, and Ben Chapman of the Philadelphia Phillies, and so forth. But he refused to write people off. I'd ask him that. Can I ask him one more question? Tell me about your kids. I think that was his passion. I just love to hear him talk about his children.
Jackie Robinson, growing up in Pasadena, was saved from the gangs by a Methodist minister who made Jackie Robinson one of the missions of his life. And the story that often doesn't get told is in the decision to sign Jackie Robinson, Branch Rickey, a Methodist and a Christian. That played a major, major part in that decision because our friend Dr. Michael knows better than any of us. It was a major factor because he needed someone who would turn the other cheek. Dr. Clanton.
I appreciate your comments and just wanted to bear witness to the impact of Jackie Robinson in the world in which I grew up. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I was 5 when he started playing baseball, but we didn't have TV for another 3 or 4 years. But of course, baseball then became a main entertainment, and I can attest that his arrival was not celebrated. And by the time I was 10, the Dodgers had several other black players. And when their pitcher was Don Newcomb, they had 5 players, 5 black starters. And this was deeply alienating to the people in the culture in which I grew up. I should add, fortunately for me, not in my home, but in the world of the adults to whom I was exposed. This was still before the 1954 decision. Segregation really seemed secure, but the degree to which his arrival in Major League Baseball upset the South is considerable. I should just add at that time, it'd be hard for these young people to believe, but the farthest south and west that Major League sports went at that time was St. Louis. So, do with that story what you will.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll give you the other side is that in 1947, TVs weren't in a lot of people's homes, and poor African Americans in the South would come in from the fields and they'd go to a local store, local hardware store, or local general store, and all gather around the radio and listen to the baseball game. And there's some great letters that these folks sent to Jackie, and they're full of misspellings and they're difficult to read. But what heart he gave them to straighten their backs. You can't imagine how they felt when they listened to him, his exploits on the baseball diamond in that small store in the South. I can't imagine it, but reading the letters is a deeply moving experience. So that's the converse side, but thanks for that comment.
The last question here, but let me just say, Dr. Long, when we've finished in just a couple of minutes, we'll go to the table. What books are left, he will be happy to sign. If we run out of books, this is the deal I'll make. if you will pay for a book and give us your address, because Dr. Long and I are going to be together in Boston and Denver, I will see to it that you get a copy, but you'll have to pay, because one of our challenges is to know how many books to order. Sending back books is not fun. Yes, sir, right here.
I'd like to start off by
let me just say, it's Jerry Butkowitz, who was with SDG&E, but was the greatest labor leader in the history of San Diego, Mr. Butkowitz.
I have a question. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the Padres for their recognition of the Negro League, the baseball league. It's really fascinating. My question would be, what was Jackie's opinion of the Negro baseball league?
He did not have warm thoughts about the Negro Leagues. He played in them, Kansas City Monarchs, and he was disgusted by the way he felt they treated their players. He didn't seem to warm up to his fellow players very well either. He thought the conditions were absolutely horrible. He also felt that the players, I'm telling you what Robinson believed, didn't take the game seriously enough. So they caroused too much, as he put it. They drank too much. They weren't athletic enough. And those conditions he felt were fomented by the conditions in which they played and under. So he was glad, really glad to get out of the Negro Leagues. And he never apologized to those critics who believed that his entry into Major League Baseball led to the downfall of the Negro Leagues. He never apologized for that. He thought that the Negro Leagues should have been gone. And he also didn't like them because they were segregated. So that's it in a nutshell. Those are tough words that we hear from Jackie on that. You know, I want to give the students a chance to ask questions. I know sometimes the adults get...
Yep.
We understand from research that the Civil Rights Movement was an era of not relabeling, but a reappropriation of language. And I wondered what Mr. Robinson's stance on the terms Negro and colored and black, and what term he identified with, and if he saw impacts behind language.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. But I can tell you this. I'll look it up. And I'll also tell you this. He was not a big fan of Black Power, of the young Black militants in the 1960s. So he wasn't a big fan of Afro-American politics. And his daughter, Sharon, had a poster of Huey Newton, Black Power leader at the time, hanging in her room. And he demanded that she take that poster down. He was not a fan of Black Power politics that embraced separatism or that embraced the use of any means necessary. And really, that's his conflict with Malcolm X as well, and all of those who followed him. So he was always less inclined to be on the edge in terms of language and in terms of politics and in terms of the social agenda. And he certainly was not a fan of Stokely Carmichael and Huey Newton and all the other young Black militants at the time. He thought they were just tanking the movement. He really did. And Sharon's response to her dad when he said, take down that poster of Huey Newton, this is my house, not your house, was, Dad, you got to get with it, man. But he never got with it. Thank you. Pardon me? Well, when your father's Jackie Robinson, it's his house and he insists, she takes down the poster. Another student? Okay. There's
Mr. Williams.
Yes. I'd like to say just a few things. I was, at the time, Jackie Robinson. I'm almost a contemporary, the same age as his wife. And I remember, in my young days, I was a human being. And almost all Black people felt that they were human beings. What they couldn't understand was why they were not accepted. And I think that's the thing that you're talking about, Jackie Robinson. And I remember feeling my own self, I did not understand Black militants who wanted to a separate country or something, because there was no reason for that, because we were all human beings, and why was there a problem of us being able to act like human beings and be accepted by all you folks? Why can't you let us be human beings? So that's what Jackie Robinson, I believe, was saying, and that's how I felt too about some of the militants, because in my heart, right here in San Diego, I felt, why would black people want to fight? We bought into the notion of this, all people are the same, you know, the Constitution of the United States. We bought into that, that dream that we are citizens of a country. We're not subjects of a king or potentate or something. We bought into that. So why is it so hard for everybody else not to buy into that? And I think that was Robinson's view, because that was my view.
Again, for the students, this man is a living legend. San Diego City Council, San Diego County Board of Supervisors, and was chairman for the longest time of the Metropolitan Transit District. As lovely a human being as I've ever known.
He's clapping right back at you. Well, Leon, I know that you were a World War II veteran as well. And Robinson served in the military too. And he believed that he, like you and so many others, were deeply invested. That's the way he put it. We're deeply invested in this country. We've sacrificed for it. We've built this country. There's no reason why we should now flee the country. And on top of that, he said, I want those investments to come back so that my children can live off them. So the sacrifices that you've made and the sacrifices that he made, he wanted to see redound to his children.
Jackie Robinson said that a life is not important except in the effect that it has on other lives. We all should remember that. In the New Testament book of 1 John chapter 4, verse 20, there's a scripture which says that if you say you love God whom you have not seen, but do not love your brothers and sisters whom you have seen, you are a liar. Jackie Robinson understood in such a profound way. We are all brothers and sisters. And now let us express to Dr. Michael Long our appreciation. Thank you all.